Hello, my name is Melissa, and I am the director at the Sutliff Museum. Welcome to the first of 3 presentations in our new Faces of Freedom digital lecture series. Here we will take a deeper look at some of the people behind the abolitionist movement. These people were former slaves that either purchased their freedom or escaped through the Underground Railroad. Whatever their stories are, they need to be told. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave boy from Tuckahoe, Maryland, lived with his grandmother Betsy near the Choptank River. His mother Harriet Bailey was sent miles away to the Y plantation when Frederick was an infant. Young Frederick spent time with his grandmother drawing water from the well, listening to birds singing, and watching the clouds as they slowly floated by. Betsy was known and respected for making the finest fish nets. Her day's catch would hold an abundance of herring to go along with the corn post she would feed the many plantation children in her care. They lived together in a bare log hut, no beds, no blankets, no windows. On cold nights, the children would cuddle next to the earthen chimney to keep warm. The tow linen shirt, given out once a year, was the only clothing slave children would receive. But life was easy compared to what was ahead. All this would change between the ages of 6 or 7, when his grandmother was ordered to bring Frederick to the Y plantation. He felt he was betrayed by his mother. She had no choice. She had to deliver Frederick to Master Lloyd's plantation. Although Overseer Aaron Anthony was rumored to be Frederick's white father, it would not have made any difference. If a slaveholder fathered a mulatto child, they were usually whisked away to be sold to a neighboring plantation. Although Frederick had 3 siblings already at the Y plantation, he did not know them. His own mother saw him only 3 or 4 times during his life, and only at night. After her day's work, she would walk the 12 miles to briefly visit her young son. If she was not back by the morning wake-up horn, she would be severely beaten by the overseer. According to Douglas, his Aunt Hester was an exceptionally beautiful woman. She was the envy of blacks and whites alike. She failed one day to return on time, and she was beaten mercilessly. For 30 minutes, blood poured down her back from the flogging. This was witnessed by young Frederick. He was so terrified at the brutality, he hid in a closet for hours, thinking he would be next. When Master Aaron Anthony, overseer and slaveholder, died in 1826, young Frederick became the property of Anthony's son-in-law, Thomas Old, and his wife, Lucretia. They loaned him out to Thomas's brother, Hugh. Still a young boy himself, Frederick would be responsible for meeting the needs of Hugh and Sophia's youngest son, Thomas. Sophia taught both boys their letters. So pleased at how quickly young Frederick was progressing, she could not wait to share the good news with her husband. Upon hearing Sophia's news, Mr. Auld demanded she stop immediately. "Education makes slaves rebellious," he warned. She never taught Frederick again. But she had stirred a desire within him that could not be taken away. In his speeches years later, Douglas would remark, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." He knew what he wanted and saw a way to get there. He wanted to be free. Frederick saved money from blackening boots to buy the Columbian Orator, a book he had heard the white boys mention. He continued to trace and copy letters in Webster's spelling book and Thomas Ould's old books. By this time, young Thomas was no longer a schoolboy. Hugh Ould no longer needed a house slave, so Frederick was sent back to Thomas Ould. Master Thomas Ould, in turn, sent him to a notorious slave breaker, Edward Covey. The term was supposed to be for 1 year, but Covey was ruthless. Frederick was starved and beaten repeatedly until he could take it no more. Knowing full well that if Frederick were to retaliate, it would result in his own death by hanging, he did it anyway. Frederick stood up for himself, beating Covey to a draw. When it was over, nothing was done. Covey's reputation as a slave breaker was on the line. He never beat Frederick again. When a slave cannot be flogged, he is half free, Frederick believed. After this, he found himself in the Baltimore shipyards of Hugh Auld. He began copying and tracing letters LS, LA, SA, the letters on ships standing for larboard, starboard aft, and starboard aft. He would study by candlelight into the night. Eventually, the things he would learn in the shipyards would help him to escape slavery. Frederick was then loaned out to William Freeland. Freeland was better than most. Frederick was able to teach reading and writing at his Sunday school. About 30 slaves attended until their masters shut it down. Undeterred, he secretly set up another Sunday school, this time hidden in the woods. Frederick Douglass vowed to himself before the year was out he would be free. Frederick, along with 5 other friends, planned their escape. They would travel by open boat downriver to Delaware. The plan had failed. Someone had betrayed them, and all were jailed. 2 years later, on September 3, 1838, dressed as a sailor, Frederick Douglass, with forged papers in hand, jumped on a moving train to New York. There he met up with his fiancée, Anna Murray, a free black housekeeper. Anna and Frederick had met in 1837 while attending the East Baltimore Mental and Improvement Society. They married in New York, later heading on to New Bedford, Massachusetts, so that Frederick would not be found by Thomas Auld. They would remain married until Anna's death over 40 years later. Douglass began subscribing to William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator. When Garrison heard Douglass speak against the ills of slavery, he was so taken by his oratorical skills that he invited Douglass to join his American anti-slavery tour. There were concerns at the time that Douglass, a fugitive slave, would be hunted down and possibly be returned to Thomas Auld. Convinced by his friends to flee to England, Douglass did so. He continued to give speeches in England and Ireland on the inhumanity of slavery. While there, his friends collected 150 pounds of silver to purchase his freedom from Auld. Douglass, who was photographed 160 times, was the most photographed individual in the 19th century. Abraham Lincoln was only photographed 125 times. Douglass believed that if he could be shown dressed in a waistcoat, jacket, and tie, people would no longer see him as a slave, but as a dignified man. Douglass became known as the country's best orator, author, publisher, and statesman. As a self-made, educated man, he went on to serve as U.S. Marshal to the District of Columbia, U.S. Minister to Haiti, and President of the Freedmen's Bank. Throughout his life, he published many anti-slavery publications and pamphlets, including the North Star. Douglass, a supporter of women's suffrage, was the only African American to attend the Seneca Falls Convention. 2 years after Anna's death, Frederick married Helen Pitts, a suffragist. His second marriage sparked much controversy, as Helen was 20 years younger and white. Frederick responded by saying his first marriage had been to someone the color of his mother, and the second to someone the color of his father. As a good friend of the Lincoln family, Douglass was given President Lincoln's walking stick by Mary Todd Lincoln, and asked to give the dedication speech at the Lincoln Memorial, where he said, "Truth is more proper and beautiful at all times, and in all places, and it is never in any case more beautiful than when one is speaking of a great public man whose example is likely to be condemned for honor and imitation long after his departure to solemn shades." The same could be said of Frederick Douglass, who reminds us, if the time ever comes when we shall possess in the colored people of the United States a class of men noted for enterprise, industry, economy, and success, we shall no longer have any trouble in the matter of political and civil rights. Thank you for joining me for this presentation of Faces of Freedom. Our next program will be on July 11th with the final lecture from our Spring Nurturing Pathways to Freedom series. If you have any questions, please email or call the Sutliff Museum. Please follow us on social media for more facts about the abolitionist movement, the Victorian era, and, of course, the Sutliff family. Thank you.